Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, November 28, 2023. Memorial service in Atlanta for former First Lady Rosalyn Carter was attended by her husband, former President Jimmy Carter, 99 years old. Also, Presidents Joe Biden and Bill Clinton, and all 5 living former First Ladies. Rosalynn Carter's son, James Earl "Chip" Carter III, saying, "My mother was the glue that held our family together through the ups and downs and thicks and thins of our family's politics." A resolution to expel Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York, has been formally introduced on the House floor, setting up a vote within the next 2 days. Congressman Santos is facing federal charges of fraud and corruption, and a House Ethics Committee investigation found what it said was substantial evidence the congressman knowingly violated both criminal laws and House rules. Congressman Santos says he's not guilty of the charges and should not be expelled from the House without being convicted. U.S. Senate leaders' statements on aid to Ukraine seem to point to a major disagreement over whether to include changes to U.S. border security in the same bill. We'll hear from those leaders and talk with CQ Roll Call Editor-in-Chief Jason Dick. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is at NATO headquarters in Brussels for a foreign ministers' meeting about aid to Ukraine. He'll then be traveling to Israel to see if the truce with Hamas can be extended. As today, 12 more hostages who were held in Gaza have been released, along with 30 Palestinians who were in Israeli prisons. No Americans are among the released hostages. Also, we'll have the U.S. economy and interest rate forecast, a view from the Federal Reserve Board member Christopher Waller, and on Capitol Hill, the lighting of the U.S. Capitol Christmas tree. A celebration of life service for Rosalynn Carter, former First Lady, who died a week and a half ago at the age of 96, held at the Glenn Memorial Church on the campus of Emory University in Atlanta. Hymns sung by Atlanta Symphony Orchestra Chamber Chorus, but also pianist David Osborne with a rendition of Wind Beneath My Wings. In the audience, 99-year-old husband of the former First Lady, former President Jimmy Carter, plus President Joe Biden and Bill Clinton, and all the living former First Ladies, Hillary Clinton, Laura Bush, Michelle Obama, Melania Trump. Also there, Vice President Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff. One of the tributes coming from Catherine Cade, former White House Projects Director for Rosalynn Carter.
What a remarkable woman she was. Wife, mother, business manager, political strategist, diplomat, advocate, author. Yet what I remember most about her was her tireless dedication to taking care of others. She was often fond of recalling the time that Margaret Mead came to visit her in the White House. Dr. Mead said to her then, "Our success as a society and our value as individuals must be measured by the compassion we show for the most vulnerable among us." In many ways, Dr. Mead had captured the very essence of Rosalynn Carter. The issues that claimed her time and attention: mental health, support for caregivers, childhood immunization, problems of the elderly, neglected tropical diseases, even building latrines to prevent the spread of trachoma, a blinding eye disease. These were not glamorous or sexy causes, yet she brought critical leadership to problems that impact the lives of millions. Rosalynn's compassion and empathy for those who are suffering was boundless. Her passion for action even more so. I shall never forget the day as First Lady she decided to personally visit the refugee camps in Thailand, where thousands of Cambodians lay desperately ill and dying. "I have to do something," she said. Rosalynn was determined to help. The doctors in the camps called her the Yankee Angel because she brought hope where there had been none. As a result of her efforts, a broad coalition came together and raised tens of millions of dollars for refugee relief. Her tenure as First Lady of the United States was just one chapter in a life that was really devoted to caring and doing good for others. With President Carter, she founded the Carter Center, is one of the world's foremost humanitarian organizations.
Catherine Cade, former White House Projects Director for Rosalynn Carter, at today's service in Atlanta. Neglected to mention that along with the former First Ladies who were there, the current First Lady, Jill Biden, also in attendance. The son of Rosalynn Carter, James Earl Chip Carter, also gave a tribute and some funny and heartwarming stories along with it.
Mom was always fun to be with. On the Halloween before the pandemic, Mom showed up at Amy's house. Amy lives on a street which closes down on Halloween, and every house is decorated. Mom was beautifully dressed as a monarch butterfly. The Secret Service were dressed casually but perfectly as Secret Service agents. She proceeded to go up and down the street with her grand and grandchildren and go trick-or-treating up and down and talk to people all over the street. She got back to Amy's and was so excited because she'd been out so much and nobody had recognized her. After Dad was put in hospice and my mother was racked with dementia, my siblings, my wife and I, would stay with them so that there would always be a family member around. One day, my mother was sitting with my wife, Becky, and she was reminiscing on what it was like to go to live in Hawaii. And she was talking about learning all the native dances. And she got up from the sofa, pushed her walker away, which she couldn't take a step without, and proceeded to do the hula for 2 or 3 minutes. She grabbed her walker, turned around, sat back on the sofa, and turned to my wife and said, "That's how you do it." I will always love my mother. I will cherish how she and Dad raised her children. They've given us such a great example of how a couple should relate. Let me finish by saying that my mother, Rosalynn Carter, was the most beautiful woman I've ever met, and pretty to look at, too.
James Earl Chip Carter III, son of Rosalynn Carter, at today's service for the former First Lady, who died November 19th. There were other tributes from grandson Jason Carter and journalist Judy Woodruff, who the Atlanta Journal-Constitution writes described her more than 5-decade relationship with the late First Lady. She said the two first met in 1970 when Carter was working to elect her husband governor of Georgia, and Woodruff was a cub reporter for an Atlanta TV station. Woodruff attributes her marriage in part to the Carters, since she first met her husband, Al Hunt, playing softball at Plains High School during Jimmy Carter's presidential run. Also at the service, a duet by country music stars Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood doing John Lennon's song, Imagine.
Imagine all the people living life in peace.
Associated Press reports that the tribute started Monday morning as Rosalynn Carter's casket traveled by motorcade through the Carters' native Sumter County, where well-wishers gathered along the route in their tiny hometown of Plains and attended a wreath-laying ceremony at the college from which she graduated in 1946. During the stop at Rosalynn Carter's alma mater, her 4 children, Jack, Chip, Jeff, and Amy, watched as wreaths of white flowers were placed beside a statue of their mother on the campus where she founded the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregiving to advocate for millions of unpaid caregivers in American households. Generations of the Carter family, including the former First Lady's grandchildren and great-grandchildren, accompanied the hearse to Atlanta, where members of the public paid respects Monday evening as she lay in repose at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum. That from Associated Press. There was the service today, and on Wednesday there'll be an invite-only funeral in Plains. This is Washington Today. Back in Washington on the U.S. House floor, a privileged resolution to expel from the House Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York, was introduced by Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat from California. Sitting beside him, Congressman Dan Goldman, Democrat from New York. and the House now has 2 days to act on the resolution. This comes after a House Ethics Committee report finding substantial evidence that Congressman Santos knowingly violated ethical guidelines, House rules, and criminal laws. The congressman is facing 23 federal charges, including fraud, money laundering, falsifying records, and aggravated identity theft. Here's Congressman Garcia on the House floor presenting the resolution.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows. House Resolution 114, resolved that pursuant to Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 of the Constitution of the United States, Representative George Santos be, and he hereby is, expelled from the House of Representatives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Under Rule 9, a resolution offered from the floor by a member other than the majority leader or the minority leader as a question of the privilege of the House has immediate precedence only at a time designated by the chair within 2 legislative days after the resolution is properly noticed. Pending that designation, the form of the resolution noticed by the gentleman from California will appear in the record at this point. The chair will not, at this point, determine whether the resolution constitutes a question of privilege. That determination will be made at the time designated for consideration of the resolution.
That's Congressman Derek Van Orden, Republican from Wisconsin, presiding over the House as Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat from California, introduced this privilege resolution to expel Congressman Santos. Congressman Santos has already survived 2 expulsion attempts in his first year in office, and the House Ethics Committee chair, Congressman Michael Guest, Republican from Mississippi, has also introduced, or said he would be introducing, a resolution to expel Congressman Santos. Several members who voted no on previous resolutions to expel are now saying they will vote yes. Reporters caught up with Congressman Santos today in a House office building hallway.
Can I get your reaction to leadership not whipping against you in this vote? Mr. Emmer said that his team will not be whipping against.
Look, you all want a soundbite. This is the 3rd time we're going through this. I don't care. I was sent here by the people of the 3rd District of New York. I represent them, not the political class in Washington, D.C. If they want to send me home, if they think this was a fair process, if they think this is how it should be done, and if they're confident that this is a constitutional way of doing it, God bless their hearts.
Is it inevitable it happens?
Have you spoken to your colleagues to get their support?
I'm sorry?
Have you spoken to your colleagues to get their support?
No, I've never done it. This is the 3rd time we've gone through this. I didn't do it the first time. I didn't do it the second time. Not going to do it the 3rd time.
Why not whip some votes? Why not ask people?
It's not a good use of my time. Do you know what's a good use of all of our time? Is fixing the massive inflation in this country, is fixing the issues we have in our border. I went to San Diego last week. It is terrible, terrible. That's what we should be putting our energy on, not on censuring one another, expelling one another, witch hunts against the political class. Nobody cares. If this building, if this city put the effort to fixing our country the same way that they put on expelling me, we'd be in a better place. But this place is littered in political theater, and the American people are the ones paying the price. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Congressman George Santos with reporters. He's a Republican from New York. The privilege resolution that was introduced today to expel him needs to come up in one way or another dealing with a vote. It could be a straight up and down vote. It could be a motion to table or kill it. It could be a motion to refer it to committee. Expect it to be a straight up and down vote. That should happen within 2 days. In the history of and it also takes a 2/3 vote of members of Congress to expel a member. In the history of the U.S. House of Representatives, there have been 5 expulsions. One was in 1797. 3 were during the Civil War, and the last 2 were more recent. Michael Ozzie Myers, Democrat from Pennsylvania in 1980, and James Traficant, Democrat from Ohio, in 2002. Story from the New York Times, with Republicans in Congress stalling on granting Ukraine more military aid. NATO's top diplomat warned on Tuesday that it would be dangerous to curtail support to the war as member countries tried to pin down the United States on its commitments to Kyiv and as the conflict in Gaza sapped Washington's attention. As foreign ministers gathered Tuesday at the military alliance's headquarters in the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg insisted that Ukraine would remain a top priority. He predicted that U.S. assistance would continue, not only to protect American security interests, but also because it's what we have agreed. That from the New York Times. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also attending that ministerial meeting at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and then he'll be heading back to Israel for seeking a continuation of the truce between Israel and Hamas and further hostage for prisoner trades, allowing more humanitarian aid to reach Gaza. Secretary Blinken met with the NATO Secretary General and spoke to reporters.
It's always very good to be back in Belgium and Brussels. Here at NATO, it's almost become like a second home over the last 3 years. But I think it's evidence of the fact that what we are doing with the NATO alliance is more important than it's ever been. And you've seen over the last 3 years, NATO stepping up in very important ways to deal with the challenges that we face and that we're facing together. We will be strongly reaffirming our support for Ukraine as it continues to face Russia's war of aggression. We will be looking to the summit next year in Washington to celebrate the 75th anniversary of NATO, but not just celebrate that anniversary, continue to carry the alliance forward, including with the commitments that its members are making to our collective defense. We have a lot of work that we'll be doing, as you said, as well, on the Western Balkans, with our partners for NATO from around the world, including the Asia Pacific. And of course, we will be talking about the crisis in Gaza and the broader Middle East. Like you, Jens, I am very pleased to see hostages returning home, coming back to be with their loved ones. And we're determined to continue that for as long as possible to bring as many people home as we possibly can. And that continues. So we have a lot on the agenda, but I have to say this. Everything that we've been able to do with the NATO alliance over the last few years, strengthening the alliance, making it fit for purpose for the challenges that we're going to be facing in the years ahead, dealing with the Russian aggression against Ukraine, so many other things. None of that would have happened without the leadership of Jens Stoltenberg. We are grateful to you, grateful for that extraordinary leadership at a moment where it counted more than ever. So it's good to be here, good to work with you as always. Thank you.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken alongside NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. Returning to Washington, D.C., U.S. Senate leaders meeting with reporters, solidifying their positions about President Biden's national security emergency supplemental spending request for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and U.S. southern border security. But President Biden not putting in what the Republicans in Congress would like on that issue. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer again calling for passage of the president's request as a whole, and then separately, a bipartisan border security bill.
In our supplemental, there are a number of things we have to do at once. Deliver aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine, humanitarian assistance to help innocent victims in Gaza, and military capabilities in the Indo-Pacific. All these national security issues are related and should move together. We are under threat from authoritarians around the world, whether they be in Russia or China or Iran, and Iran-sponsored things like Hamas and Hezbollah. As the Republican leader has noted, America doesn't have the luxury, I agree with the leader on that for sure. America doesn't have the luxury to pick and choose national security threats that befall us. We must address all of them, because our adversaries, Russia, China, the CPP, Russia, Iran, the CPP, are investing heavily in them too. But for weeks, long weeks, a handful of Republicans have dangerously tried to link Ukraine aid and make our support for democracy in the West a pivotal issue that history will remember us for, conditional on passing hard right border policies similar to H.R. 2. Instead, Democrats are working to have a good faith conversation with Republicans on what both sides can agree on the border. But you can know one thing for sure, that it's the Republicans holding this up by their insistence on an extraneous and partisan issue where there's always difficulty in coming to agreement on.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at the start of a news conference with other Senate Democratic leaders. The Senate Republican leadership also held a news conference, and the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky agreeing with Senator Schumer about the need to help both Israel and Ukraine, but disagreeing about whether U.S. immigration law changes should be included with the Ukraine aid.
I think you'll all agree that there's been no more enthusiastic supporter of a comprehensive supplemental than me. I think it's important for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, and also to secure the border. I called the president last week to make sure he understood that there wouldn't be a bill without a credible effort to get on top of our disastrous southern border situation. I hope that made the point, because I think on our side I've been the most enthusiastic supporter of the underlying bill, but this has to be a part of it. It's extremely important that it be a part of it. I also, on Thanksgiving Day, got a call from the Prime Minister of Israel. I think it's really important that we not pressure the Israelis into a situation where they can't ultimately achieve their goal. But we are obviously happy about the hostages that have been released. There's still a lot there and more left to be done to get them out.
The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, at a news conference with other Senate Republican leaders. C-SPAN spoke this morning with CQ Roll Call Editor-in-Chief Jason Dick, who says the Senate and the House will likely not move on any Ukraine-Israel funding and border security bill or bills this week.
We're not expecting any sort of substantive thing on the either floor of either chamber this week when it comes to a Ukraine security package. Now that there is a lot of momentum, at least among the congressional leaders. Right, yesterday, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, said, of course, we need to, get money to Ukraine. We can't afford to have Vladimir Putin, marching across Europe. That's a more aggressive, sort of thing that some people were looking for. Some people who support Ukraine supplemental. He also said that needs to be coupled with a border security package, which is one of those things that. We've both been in Washington for a long time, John. They've always been talking about immigration and immigration reform. That's always a fraught topic to try to attach to something that is considered must pass. So I think we're going to see a lot of people talking about, do we couple Ukraine, Israeli aid into Taiwan as well, and border security, and can we get that out the door before December 14th when the House wants to leave?
As this debate is happening on Capitol Hill, what role is the White House playing? How much pressure can and are they applying to what's happening here on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue?
It seems like the message is a little muddled. The White House obviously wants to get a Ukraine supplemental package out the door as soon as possible, with sort of as much flexibility as possible, hopefully coupled with Israeli and aid to Gaza for humanitarian purposes. And it just seems like they're not escalating. I mean, yesterday, the president, when he was announcing his supply chain council and these executive orders to sort of streamline the supply chain, he made some comments about it, but he hasn't been fully aggressive. Obviously, he has his legislative liaisons and folks up on the Hill, but there's only so much pushing you can do in these. I mean, it's sort of like, sometimes when you're hurting, a lot of stray, it's not even stray cats at this point. It's still, I think it's still at the cattle stage. You can only do so much, to push people in one direction. And, they're just getting back. I mean, it is a relatively slow start, even though it seems like we are running out of days before the end of the year. I mean, the House is just coming back today. The Senate came back last night. They're not in a huge hurry to get something on the floor. And also the president is sort of occupied. He's going down to Atlanta today for the memorial services for Rosalynn Carter. I'm sure that will sort of occupy most of his time and most of the messaging too, as they don't want to, look like they're going, partisan and pushing for, war aid during a funeral.
Jason Dick is CQ Roll Call Editor-in-Chief on C-SPAN's morning program, Washington Journal. This from CBS News. 12 more hostages who were held in Gaza were released on Tuesday, according to the Red Cross and the Israeli Defense Forces, after a humanitarian pause in fighting between Hamas and Israel was extended on Monday for an additional 48 hours. Red Cross representatives transferred the 12 hostages to Egypt, the IDF said. In exchange, 30 Palestinians were released from Israeli prisons, 15 minors and 15 women. Spokesperson for Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in a statement, none of the hostages released Tuesday were American. The group included 10 Israelis, 1 Filipino, 2 Argentinians, and 2 Thai citizens. 1 Israeli is a minor, and 9 are women. At the Pentagon, Press Secretary Pat Ryder saying the U.S. military has for the first time airlifted aid to Gaza.
Today, the United States airlifted 24.5 metric tons, or more than 54,000 pounds, of UN humanitarian supplies to provide vitally needed medical supplies, warm clothing, and food and nutrition assistance to the people of Gaza. At the request of USAID, these supplies were transported via a U.S. Air Force C-17 Globemaster aircraft and arrived today in Egypt, where they will be transported via ground into Gaza and then distributed by UN agencies. Additional flights are expected in the coming days, and this aid is in addition to the more than 500,000 pounds of food assistance delivered by the United States last week via USAID contracted aircraft to Al Arish, Egypt, for onward travel to Gaza.
The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, also an Air Force Brigadier General, at his news conference today at the Pentagon. During the Q&A with reporters, he was asked about an incident last weekend where 2 ballistic missiles were fired from areas of Yemen controlled by Houthis, supported by Iran, and landed about 10 nautical miles from a U.S. warship.
Pat, I'd like to ask you about the ballistic missiles that were fired by the Houthis just on Sunday. Do you consider that the U.S. Navy was the target of those missiles, and what evidence do you have that they were or weren't? And why is the U.S. not responding to these kind of persistent probing of U.S. forces?
So a couple updates on that front. So as it pertains to the incident with the missiles, right now our current analysis is that we know that there was at least 1 missile fired. We're continuing to look into that, whether it was 1 or 2, but we know that there was at least 1 missile. And we also, at this point, assess that the vessels, the Mason and the Central Park, were not the intended targets. That said, I can't speak for what the intended target was, and would have to refer you to the Houthi rebels to talk to that.
But how can you say that the USS Mason or Central Park were not the target? What would be the target if they're
Again, that's a great question. It's something that we're continuing to analyze. As you've heard us say, this missile landed approximately 10 nautical miles away from these vessels. But again, current assessment right now is that it was not specific. The ships were not specifically being targeted.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder at his news conference. Washington Today continues in a moment.
We want to take a minute to ask for your help. Your financial support will ensure that C-SPAN can continue to produce podcasts that inform you about national politics, introduce you to the latest nonfiction books, and provide valuable historical context to today's news. Make a donation today and be a part of C-SPAN's future. Visit c-span.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. A few more headlines. This from the Washington Post. The powerful political network led by conservative billionaire Charles Koch endorsed Nikki Haley for president on Tuesday, as it looks to stop Donald Trump from being the Republican nominee. Americans for Prosperity Action, the network's flagship political group, announced the group's first endorsement of its type in a presidential race. In 2015, the Koch network identified 5 approved presidential candidates, all of whom fell to Trump. And from USA Today, Hunter Biden responded Tuesday to a House subpoena for testimony about his overseas business deals. offering to testify at an open hearing rather than closed-door deposition, which his lawyer said would prevent a, quote, cloaked, one-sided process. But Congressman James Comer, chair of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, said he would be expected to testify behind confidentiality at first, as requested. Congressman Comer said in a statement, Hunter Biden is trying to play by his own rules instead of following the rules required of everyone else. That won't stand with House Republicans. An update on the economy and the future of interest rates from Federal Reserve Board of Governors member Christopher Waller. During a speech at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, he said he's growing more confident the Fed's policies to bring down inflation are working, but he's not sure how much more, such as interest rate increases, needs to be done.
Data for October indicated an easing in economic activity, and forecasts for the fourth quarter show the kind of moderation that is more in keeping with progress on lowering inflation. In addition, after watching core PCE inflation increase in September from its summer lows, the latest data showed inflation moving in the right direction in October, albeit gradually. So while I am encouraged by the early signs of moderating economic activity in the fourth quarter based on the data in hand, inflation is still too high, and it is too early to say whether the slowing we are seeing will be sustained. But I am increasingly confident that policy is currently well positioned to slow the economy and get inflation back to 2%. Now, that said, there is still significant uncertainty about the pace of future activity, and so I cannot say for sure whether the FOMC has done enough to achieve price stability. Hopefully, the data we receive over the next couple of months will help answer that question.
Christopher Waller, one of the 7 Federal Reserve Board of Governors members, today at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington. A CNBC article begins, a subsequent speech Tuesday morning from Governor Michael Bowman offered a contrasting view in which she reiterated her belief that more rate hikes likely will be needed as evolving dynamics keep inflation elevated. The commentary comes 2 weeks before the rate-setting Federal Open Market Committee's December 12th and 13th policy meeting. That from CNBC. Back to Christopher Waller. After his speech in a question and answer period, he was asked what will likely come of this prolonged Federal Reserve effort to bring down inflation. Will it be a recession or a soft landing?
So back in May 22, I gave a speech outlining what I thought a soft landing would be and how we could actually achieve it. And it was largely the fact that we had so many vacancies to workers that I thought our efforts in raising the policy rate could put downward pressure on labor demand, not through getting rid of workers, which there seemed to be a big shortage of, but just reducing the number of vacancies. Mm-hmm. Now, inevitably, there's going to be some increase in unemployment, but through some analysis I did with Andy Frugera at the Board of Governors, we said that, look, in unemployment, if there aren't massive layoffs, if you just keep the involuntary job separation rate stable, you can get vacancies down, get labor demand down, and unemployment would only go up to maybe 4.3 or 4.4%. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of controversy around that argument, but so far it seems to have played out fairly closely. Unemployment's 3.9. We still haven't quite got everything down to where it was in 2019. And so I think that is where people are starting to say, yeah, maybe this is going to look like that. If you go back in U.S. history, when you think about a recession, it's always caused by some major shock. That could happen again. There could be another major shock and this whole soft landing disappears. But shocks are shocks. We can't really forecast it. And when I think about the last 18 months, we saw a Russian invasion of Ukraine. We saw the Silicon Valley shock, banking stresses, the recent events in the Middle East. These things have all been what have normally we'd think be a big shock that could tip the economy into recession. But so far, they haven't done it. So that's why I think just looking at past recessions isn't going to be necessarily a good guide in this case. And so that's why unemployment, when it goes up fast. It doesn't kind of just gradually go up and then flatten out. But as long as we don't get any big shocks, I am reasonably confident that we can pull off this soft landing And, unemployment will probably go up a little bit more, but if we can get inflation to come down, GDP growth to soften but not go negative into a full recession, there's no reason we can't pull it off. But there's always some shock sitting in the background that may happen and blow the whole thing up.
Federal Reserve Board member Christopher Waller at the American Enterprise Institute. Wall Street today, the Dow up 83, NASDAQ up 40, and S&P up 4. Another story from CNBC, shopper turnout across websites and stores hit an all-time high of 200.4 million over the 5-day weekend from Thanksgiving Day through Cyber Monday, according to a survey by the National Retail Federation. Shoppers shelled out an average of $321.41 on holiday-related purchases over the weekend. That's roughly in line with last year. The title of a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee hearing today was The Gun Violence Epidemic, a Public Health Crisis. The witnesses included the Dean of Yale School of Public Health and a former Associate Deputy Attorney General in the Trump administration, taking different positions on this issue. Committee Chair Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, defended framing gun violence in public health terms.
I listen to those who are critical of our even having this hearing and talking about this. There's so many more important things we can talk about. And yet, I just wonder if there's anything more important than life or death in your average neighborhood. Is there anything more important than knowing that that little boy or little girl that you sent to school this morning is safe in the classroom, doesn't have to hide under his desk, active shooter drills and exercises? That really gets down to the basics. If you want to know about the safety of your family, it starts with the knowledge that when that child goes to school, he's going to come home safe at the end of the day. If you can't answer that question affirmatively, what in the hell are the rest of the questions worth? This, to me, is a fundamental issue, and it is a public health issue. It involves not hairstyles, it involves death by gunshot. And it's going on in America every single damn day. And we have a responsibility to do something up here. Not just to say we need to fund the police more. I'll sign up for that. We need to deal with mental health counseling. I'll sign up for that as well. But are we going to do some basic things like safety locks on guns so the kids can't play with them? Are we going to do anything basic like identifying people who should not even be considered owners of guns and take advantage of the gun store loophole? That to me is an example of what we can do that's just common sense.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, Judiciary Committee Chair at today's hearing. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that in 2022, there were more than 48,000 firearm-related deaths in the United States, about half suicides, another 40% homicides. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, at today's hearing said the focus needs to be on criminals who use guns.
Today's Democrats, when it comes to guns, their objective is to disarm law-abiding citizens. They simultaneously embrace policies that release violent criminals from jail. They're not interested in locking up murderers. They're not interested in locking up gangbangers. They're not interested in locking up violent criminals. Instead, they systematically support policies that release violent criminals. By the way, if you are hesitant to believe me when I say this, perhaps you'll believe the mayor of Dallas. The mayor of Dallas, Eric Johnson, who's a friend, he's a lifelong Democrat. He's African-American mayor, elected in Dallas, been a Democrat his whole life until just recently. He left the Democrat Party and became a Republican. Now, let me read you why Mayor Johnson became a Republican. Quote, "Unfortunately, many of our cities are in disarray. Mayors and other local elected officials have failed to make public safety a priority or to exercise fiscal restraint. Most of these local leaders are proud Democrats who view cities as laboratories for liberalism rather than as havens for opportunity and free enterprise. Too often, local tax dollars are spent on policies that exacerbate homelessness, coddle criminals, and make it harder for ordinary people to make a living. And too many local Democrats insist on virtue signaling, proposing half-baked government programs that aim to solve every single societal ill, and on finding new ways to thumb their noses at Republicans at the state and federal level."
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, at the Judiciary Committee hearing today, looking at gun violence and public health. We covered it live on the C-SPAN networks. You can find the video at cspan.org. The U.S. Capitol Christmas tree was officially lit tonight. Each year, the architect of the Capitol chooses a tree in consultation with the U.S. Forest Service. This year's tree is from the Greenbrier Ranger District in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. It's a 63-foot Norway spruce. At today's ceremony, Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana.
Welcome to the Capitol. Thank you to everyone, including all of our colleagues, for joining us here tonight. What a fun event. I tell you what, you West Virginians are pretty tough folks. This is pretty cold out here. In Louisiana, we wear shorts and T-shirts sometimes in December, so I will do my best to keep this brief and get us all back inside. I want to give a special thank you to the West Virginia delegation, Senator Manchin and Senator Capito, and Representative Mooney and Representative Miller for being here. We want to thank you for sharing a small piece of your state's abundant beauty with us in Washington. I also want to thank Chief Randy Moore with the U.S. Forest Service, Jim Kaufman and the staff of the architect of the Capitol, and of course our wonderful drivers. They've been referenced already, but Jesus Davila, Tim Dean, Gina Jones, and Steve Jones. They safely shepherded, how about that? They safely shepherded this magnificent Norway spruce from the Monongahela National Forest across the country and here to us at the Capitol. You know, I've only been Speaker for a month, and daily I've stood in awe of the staff and the administration that keep us not just the lights on here at the Capitol, but they maintain the beauty and the integrity of this institution. In every capacity, we are public servants and stewards of the American people, and this tree represents so much of what makes America great. As has been said, it was cultivated and harvested from a national forest. It's set forth for viewing in an array of communities across the country, and now it will be displayed for all of America to see right in front of the People's House. The tree is a beautiful tapestry. It's adorned with handmade ornaments from the Shawnee tribe and communities across West Virginia. It was accompanied by hundreds of essays, including the winning essay from Ethan Reese, who I am so excited to introduce to you in just a moment. The tree is truly the people's tree. It, of course, represents also a great American tradition. It also signifies, of course, the beginning of this season of Christmas and the birth of the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. His birth is the reason for this season, and amid all the Christmas festivities, we cannot lose sight of that fact.
U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at the U.S. Capitol tree lighting ceremony on the west front of the Capitol. As he mentioned, it is called the People's Tree, the 5,000 ornaments made by children and volunteers from the tree's home state, this year West Virginia. And as for lighting, it'll be about 5,000 LED lights. Yesterday, First Lady Jill Biden unveiled this year's White House holiday decorations under the theme Magic, Wonder, and Joy, inspired by children's experiences of the holiday season. And the National Christmas Tree lighting ceremony outside of the White House will be taking place on Thursday. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.